Okay, yeah, we're gonna get started because this session is bound to have a lot of questions, which is great. My name is Sally Schwartz. I'm the Associate Director of the Center for Financial Wellness, and I help manage a lot of these events. We have really the powerhouse team here today. We're very lucky. We have Professor Jill Purdy, who a lot of you know, full-time professor, entrepreneurship center director. She teaches undergrad and graduate business courses in management, strategy, and organizational change. And we also have Erin Galino, who's Chief Financial and Administrative Officer at Port of Tacoma and Northwest Seaport Alliance. She's also a valued member of our Milgard Executive Council since 2015. And she brought a colleague today, who I'm gonna let you introduce.
We have one of our HR managers, Jenny and Kaylin, here that does a lot with compensation for us at the Port of Tacoma.
Great. So with that, we will get started and see where our conversation takes us.
Okay.
Yes.
Roll this
I'll roll our footage.
Yeah,
a little bit of a what not to
yeah, we're just gonna have a little brief intro here and then.
So let's talk about salary. Can you tell me about your expectations when it comes to compensation?
I can make it work for $65,000 a year. Yeah.
Yeah, you can get blank. Okay, that was just a little teaser. That's a pretty good example of what not to do.
Absolutely, yeah. Between us both, we've done a lot of hiring. I've hired, I think, hundreds and hundreds of people here at UW Tacoma, and also hired people in a small business context for my own business. So kind of got both sides of the house. A lot of my experiences in the public sector, but also in the private sector. And Erin?
And over the last 30 plus years, between Weyerhaeuser Company and the Port of Tacoma, I've hired a number of people in the finance, well, really not just in the accounting space, accounting, contracting, security, a number of different disciplines. And so a lot of experience both in governmental and public sector, but also in private industry. And so, Jill and I are going to be here. We kind of talked about how do we kind of tee this up, and there's a couple of things we thought are really kind of fun to talk about, kind of how to get to the offer, a few do's and don'ts, and then really kind of when you get the offer, talking about, what kinds of things you can do there in terms of, looking and evaluating the offers, and really talking about what's total compensation, which is very different than just looking at salary.
Yeah, so I think one of the first things to be aware of is that from the moment you have the opportunity to interview or talk with people in the company, you are starting to negotiate your compensation. Sometimes you're not doing that verbally. Sometimes it's part of negotiating the job and talking about what are the responsibilities, and in highlighting how your qualifications match to the responsibilities of the position. All those are things that happen throughout the course of multiple interviews that help set the stage for a more formal discussion of compensation. But before you ever accept an interview, you've probably done your homework, right? Because you shouldn't go on an interview where you know that the salary offer is not something that you can live with. And one of the great things about Washington State is that it's not too hard to find that information.
Right, so the state of Washington passed legislation that went into effect beginning of 2023, where employers with more than 15 employees are required to disclose some form of salary range. And and there's a lot of value in that, because and from an equity perspective, you don't have to focus as much as putting in your time and not knowing your expectations are. Or if you're not as comfortable in terms of negotiating, you have a sense of what what the range is. And so I think that was a really important piece of legislation for the state to pass that really makes it more transparent as you're looking for jobs and what the at least that base salary. Now there's a whole lot that goes into it, but at least you have more of a sense. So that's something to be looking for. Also, we were talking about, in today's world, there's so much information out there. Look at, and I would even say, like, you can go to search engines, Indeed, you can do things like that. But there's, what I tell people, go to the company's homepage. trust, I'm an old auditor, so trust but verify. There's a lot of misinformation out there, even on, some of the search engines. So go to their website, make sure it's a legitimate job, look at the information on the website, apply from there, make sure that from the get-go, you're getting into the system the right way. There's different tools like that you don't really realize with with the way the technology is, but there's a lot of misinformation out there.
I think that's really important. Just the idea that, are you applying for something that's actually a real job? Are you applying for something where, especially if it's a small firm or a new firm, you want to verify that it is a legitimate place that is going to pay you down the line. And unfortunately, those opportunities tend to prey on people just coming out of a college degree program. Or people who don't have as much work experience or don't have the network of connections that will help them find legitimate opportunities. So if you ever have questions about the legitimacy, you can do a little bit of online sleuthing, certainly to see whether there's a website. But you can also check the Washington Secretary of State website to make sure that you are dealing with a registered organization. And if you're not dealing with a legally registered organization, you may find that you're not going to get paid regularly, or even if you get paid, it's under the table, which may sound like it's a good thing, but there are not taxes or contributions to Social Security or Medicare being made on your behalf. And it can really put you behind, even though it seems like an initial advantage. So thinking carefully about the kinds of opportunities and really checking them out to make sure they're real and legitimate opportunities. We talked a little bit about commission jobs versus salary jobs. You want to add a little on that?
And I always say, know your risk tolerance. So, there are jobs out there where basically, like real estate's a good example, where you're essentially an independent contractor. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but you need to understand what that means. That basically means you're getting paid an amount of money. Maybe it's when a transaction closes, so you're not getting paid every week. You're not getting paid by the hour. But you also there's different tax consequences. So you may have to buy your own insurance. There's like I said, so independent contractors are not necessarily a bad thing. You just really have to know what the implications are, what the costs are, what the reporting requirements are. I was just recently helping somebody with their taxes, and I was explaining, if the IRS is getting it, you want to make sure you deal with it. So even if you think it's small, you want to make sure. But listen, independent contractors are not necessarily bad. You just really have to understand the total implications, and oftentimes there's more of a burden on you from a reporting. Sometimes you need a business license. And what are all those? How do you track your costs? How do you report that on your taxes? And how do you insure? How do you make sure you're insured? That's a really, I'm kind of a big risk person. So as I've told my kids, never go uninsured. Find a way, whether you have to buy your own, you have access to, but that's, it may feel like you're saving a little bit of money now, but you're just one major incident, broken, arm or something away from really burning through everything you might have made. So there's, so again, I always say, know your risk tolerance. What does that mean for you? You have to buy all your own equipment. So.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate you saying that about health insurance, because while we do have systems now, health insurance has always been one of the primary benefits that people look for from employers. And healthcare expenses and medical expenses are the #1 cause of bankruptcy in the United States. So being able, even if you have a pretty low paying, not very good insurance plan, it still benefits you because you pay lower rates. There's a contracted rate that you pay if you're a member of a group. That might mean if you go see, a doctor, that you get charged $15 because you're covered, your coverage covers it. But the real bill to your insurance company is $100. But if I go in without any insurance, I might get charged $200 cash out of pocket, right? So understanding the types and levels of opportunities for those kinds of benefits are really important.
So partly what we were kind of building up to this when we were kind of talking about, okay, there's some of these things we said, really make sure you're applying for a legitimate job. Apply on their website. No, sometimes, the other thing I'll make a plug for, of course, the Success Center. I mean, I can't tell you how invaluable the resources are here at this university, which is not the same at every university. So take advantage of the Success Center. Take advantage of these kinds of programs. There's people here who have been through that, can coach you through that, can help you with your resume, help you with your LinkedIn. I think what I'm seeing now is LinkedIn is that if you have the right word, it used to be you had to have the right words in your resume because you submit them and maybe, larger employers, it kind of gets picked out of the pile in a computer. Now LinkedIn is that source where recruiters or others are tapping into what are the key words that you have in your LinkedIn that are helping employers go, oh, they have this skill set, or they have this thing I'm looking for. So LinkedIn has really emerged as that tool that you want to think of it as it's a way to promote you and what you're looking for.
You said that we have to make sure that those apps are legitimate employers. Do you need to worry about that when somebody contacts you through LinkedIn too?
And what I would say, there's always ways, if somebody contacts you, again, go to the website, or if they're a recruiter, go to their firm. That's the beautiful thing with technology anymore is there's ways to find it, and verify it, and then there's, you can even look at their email address. I mean, there's certain indicators there that is it legit, but I always say, yeah, go, whoever they're representing, because oftentimes it may be certain companies go through a recruiter, so you may not actually see that job on their website. So then you need to kind of gather more information about, the recruiter. But there's certainly ways to really kind of go search information. Glassdoor is another good example of a tool that has information out there. So, so when, once you've kind of gotten, to that point, one of the things Jill and I talked about is, so you're in the interview, it's kind of.
One point just before we get to that, I want to say that this is a pet peeve for me. I'm sure it is for you as well. Sometimes people try to bypass the application process and use a back channel and send me their application or their resume directly. Please don't do that. It makes you look bad. It does. You really need to use the channel because keep in mind those technology systems are important. People have data analytics that they're tracking about applications, and I can't put your resume and your application into that system. You have to be the one to do it. So if there is a system for applying, and almost any larger company and even a lot of really small companies have a system for applying because it's not so hard to do now digitally. Use that system. You can certainly reach out or contact somebody if you have a network or an existing connection to say, really happy to see this job opportunity. Just want to let you know I applied, but do not send your application or your resume that way.
Yeah, absolutely. We'd send you right through. And I don't. UW is large enough that they have their own really application system, but a lot of governmental employees, we use Gov, NeoGov, right? So Gov, governmentoftjobs.com is actually a great source out there for public sector jobs. And there's different resources out there, but that's spot on. But if you do know somebody who's in that, again, I always used to say, getting your name pulled out of the pile is one thing, then it's kind of on you. But if you have resources that can help, say, hey, this is somebody I know in the organization and they can put a plug in. So you might want to look at this one. Not really, I've never had a problem with that. So,
right. No.
Good.
So then we were going to talk about once you kind of get your foot in the door and you have the opportunity to interview. I think one of the things you want to do, of course, is a lot of homework and a lot of study. Research who you're talking to. If you use social media and you're job hunting, LinkedIn should be your most important social media source, and you should spend the most time on it. You should be looking and reading and understanding, and it's not stalking when it's professional. So don't worry about that. You're not stalking, but you can find people's names and their experience, and you can find out a lot more about the company. You can find out who leaders are and what their jobs are. And honestly, if somebody didn't do all that and they came in to interview, it's a knock against them. So if you're not doing your homework, doesn't matter if it's a big company or a small company, if you're not doing your homework, it's going to count against you.
Yeah. So, and I've enjoyed it when people ask questions, say, hey, I looked at your website and these are things I saw, or I'm curious about this. You didn't have to actually know, but to know you took the time and the effort, is great. And then one of the things we talked about that I think you and I both agree is a pet peeve is at the end of an interview, when somebody has said, well, is there any reason why you wouldn't hire me? We both agree. It's like, don't ask that question. I don't care who on the Google says that. Don't.
You are not closing a car sale or something like that.
Yeah.
You have throughout the process been judged, been measured, been evaluated. And here's a really important tip. Most organizations, large or small, use some type of a checklist or a rubric to judge you against. Lucky for you, they tell you what that rubric is basically through the job requirements, right? And so you're going into a situation where you're being evaluated, but you know what you're being evaluated on. So throughout the interview process, you can really highlight, these are the attributes that I have. Here's how I fit to what you've said you're looking for. And as long as they've done a decent job of writing up what the job requirements are, then you can do a fabulous job, if you've got that in your mind, of showing how you match to it. Because that is how companies make a judgment. To even get to the interview, they've made an initial assessment, or AI or some technology tool has made an initial assessment. But as soon as you have the opportunity to talk to humans, you have the opportunity to persuade and influence them regarding your level of qualifications. And this applies even if you don't have any job experience. You can still highlight your skills and capabilities.
And it's important to remember that this is a two-way. I mean, it's important for you as a prospective employee and for the employer. And studies, and it's been a while, but I mean, studies have shown that the cost of turnover is anywhere from 1.5 to 3 times an employee's annual salary. So it's really important that it's a good fit. And so this, it's not a win-lose. It really needs to be a win-win. And so you're interviewing them as much as they're interviewing you, but really be thoughtful about, hey, this is about making an investment. I think Jill asked me, or someone asked you, what's that timeline? I know for a smaller employer, because we don't have a lot of upward opportunities, if we can really, we've always kind of said, if we can have somebody say at least 5 years, that's a lot of value for them and their growth. Certainly we'd like them to stay longer. Different employers are different, but certainly if you're going in a job and you leave in 1 to 2 years, that's not really a great experience for you, but it's also not a great value proposition for the employer. So it's really important that you're thinking about what, am I not just, as we start talking about the pay, but is this an environment that I feel like I can learn, that I can contribute, that I can thrive? Because you want it to be something that is for something longer than 1 to 2 years or less, because that really isn't, that's not really in your best interest or the employer.
Absolutely. And you all probably know this, but where you start has a big influence on where you go next. So unfortunately, as soon as you've made a choice about the first position that you take, that huge wide range of options you have when you first finished a new qualification, like a degree, begins to peel away, and you begin to be seen as someone with a particular set of skills, perhaps in a particular industry. And that's not necessarily a bad thing as long as you're happy and you like that industry. But it can be a while before you develop enough experience for people to say, oh, hey, I see you've been working in manufacturing. and now you want to come over and work in technology. How's that going to work? And if you have developed a strong set of skills, you can easily speak to the transferability of those skills. But if you're 1 or 2 years into a job, it's a lot harder to make the case. So you really do have to make good choices about what's a good fit for you. And going on lots of interviews to do that is great, because as Erin said, it is a two-way street, and you need to talk to people to learn what that opportunity is. So that is just fine, but also really being clear for yourself so that you don't set yourself up to be stuck. And you know, at UW Tacoma, we actually get a fair amount of people who come back to get a different degree in a different thing. Whether they come back for an accounting degree because they want that security pathway, or they come back for a graduate degree because they want to change fields. That is great, we love that. And it's also time consuming and expensive, right? So it's easier to kind of figure things out early on. So I want another comment about, as you're evaluating the jobs themselves, it should be really clear from the perspective of the posted position. But does anybody know what the difference is between an exempt and a non-exempt position? Yeah.
Non-exempt would be tax-free, right? And so would that be like in a nonprofit organization?
No, it's not quite right. Not quite right. Exempt and non-exempt in most organizations refers to whether you're eligible for overtime or not, right? So if you're in an exempt position, it'll often just say that in the ad, but it usually means overtime exempt. And this has actually been a legal controversy in terms of some positions that are supposedly managerial, but not really managerial, being considered exempt, meaning we're gonna pay you a flat salary and you're gonna work as many hours as needed to get the job done, versus an hourly wage position. And in fact, I think fast food restaurants, I'm sure you know about this, in fast food restaurants, there was some complaint that some shift lead people who were basically doing the same job as the hourly employees got moved to salary, but then they suddenly ended up working a lot more hours, and those were not compensated hours. There was no additional pay. So a lot of the positions you're going to be looking at will be exempt, which means not eligible for overtime. So overtime exempt, not paid overtime. And if that's the case, be sure that you're aware of what the expectations are in terms of hours. We have certainly had a lot of alum who have gone on to big name organizations, Amazon, Google, Microsoft, and been paid high salaries, but also very much pressured and expected to work more than 70 hours a week for that same salary, not 40, 70 or more. And that's a recipe for burnout, and it fits with some people and it doesn't fit with other people. So I think that's one of the pieces of the puzzle, is to really clarify the job expectations and requirements against the compensation, and be sure you know what we're talking about in terms of compensation. Is it hourly with overtime? Is it salaried? Is it a base salary plus commission or bonus? There's lots of different flavors of the way compensation occurs. Just make sure that as you're interviewing, you really understand that. And it's not a bad thing to ask questions about.
And I think it's a great segue into, like I said, okay, as we start talking about salary versus this concept of total compensation. And one of the things, I just had someone else who had a recent experience where they got two experiences. One, they got a verbal offer, and they kind of stopped looking. And then I was like, oh, well, let's just say a written offer never came, and they kind of ghosted that person. And it just blows my mind, but it's out there, it happens. And then I had another individual I was talking to that had a verbal offer, and my feedback was, well, why don't you wait till you get the written offer so you can really evaluate it? And he said, well, and this is the legitimate employer and person he was working with said, well, I'm not going to take the time to write up the offer if you won't accept it verbally. And I said, red flag, walk away. So there are some of those things that it's like, you as an individual, you get to the point where they make you an offer. Oftentimes they call you verbally, and then, it may be that in some cases, they go through a background check and then they make you the formal offer. It kind of depends on the employer, but once you get to that point, you should absolutely have something in writing. It's a form of a contract. Now, I think Jill had a great example, exempt versus non-exempt. And then there's also another space, depending on the role. It could be part of a collective bargaining agreement, which means that, it could be represented by a union. And in that case, there's really very little negotiation. The negotiation happens with the collective bargaining agreement. So you accept a position and basically the structure of the pay and most of the benefits are predetermined by that agreement. So that's, that's the nature of those types of roles and that type of agreement. They've kind of done the work for you. But in these other, positions where you're looking at exempt versus non-exempt, you're going to have generally, in this case, a salary, but there's also a value to the benefits. And so I think when you see the Port of Tacoma, we may say, I don't know if we say it on this, but it's basically the value of your benefits could be as much as 50% of your base pay. As a public employer, in many cases, we don't have stock options or bonuses, but to stay competitive in the workforce, we have competitive pay. We offer pension options. We offer things where you can put deferred, take income and put it in a deferred account and it can grow tax-free for your retirement. But we also have medical benefits, often time off, other benefits that have value to you. And so, the key thing, medical benefits is a really great one that you really need to sit down when you think about total compensation. Because you could have two jobs, one paying $60,000 and one paying $65,000. But if the higher paying one has a high deductible, a medical benefit, where you're out of pocket every month is $500 or $800 a month. You start looking at that, and all of a sudden, that higher paying job, you're not going to be keeping as much of it. And so when we talk about total compensation, that's a really important part, kind of where you can do the math. Time off, work-life balance.
Absolutely.
Education, what kind of reinvestment? Some bigger companies have, discount programs, for gym memberships, for other types of programs, mortgage programs. So it's important to see what all that employer is offering that may be things that are of value to you.
So I want to go back to where we were with exempt, because what I think you were thinking of, which is a really important thing, is are you an employee or a contractor, right?
Yeah.
So if you're an employee, the easiest, sometimes that's called a W-2 employee, because that's the form that you fill out with respect to taxes. And those kinds of positions usually come with the package of benefits. But if you're an independent contractor, you are employed by the company, but you are not necessarily having access to all of those benefits, right? And so it's important to be really clear about that. And this was a lot of the controversy around Uber drivers, right? Are they employees of Uber, or are they independent contractors who happen to provide services using the Uber platform? And this has been the subject of a lot of policy discussion and laws and all of that. So it's less common when you're looking at a living wage kind of a job that might be a more permanent full-time position, but it's still something to be thinking about. So let me add also, on top of what Erin was saying, from the perspective of the employer, when they look at hiring you and they look at your salary, you can pretty much guarantee that the cost of that position to them is 80 to 100% of what you are getting paid, because the benefits are probably 40 to 50%. And if you're a regular W-2 type of employee, they're paying half of your taxes. All of the payroll taxes that your company pays on your behalf are typically 30 to 40% of the cost of your salary. So if I was going to hire you for $100,000, I'm thinking $30,000 in addition of taxes that I pay on your behalf and my behalf, and another $50,000 to $60,000 that is going to go towards your benefits. So it's pretty easy to have that cost of the position be $200K and your salary is $100K. So recognize how powerful and important that is. Keeping in mind too that if you are an independent contractor, you pay self-employment taxes. You don't have an employer paying half of your employment taxes for you, paying half or more, or different ratios of your Social Security or your Medicare and those kinds of things. So the benefits aren't always obvious benefits, but some of them have to do with federal responsibilities or state regulatory issues and all of that.
And, you know, I'd also be thinking about, I mean, this whole pandemic, post-pandemic, virtual world, where is your home office? We're very fortunate in the state of Washington that we are not subject to a state income tax. We're one of the few states. Now, the state collects its revenue through use tax. So yes, we have a gas tax, we have sales tax, but that's all in lieu of a state income tax. But if you went to work for an employer where maybe they reside here, but if somehow your home office was designated as Oregon, your income could be subject to Oregon income tax. So, you know, like I said, it's kind of understanding that environment that state to state, you know, can vary. And like I said, it's a whole new world of kind of the remote, you know, on another scale since the pandemic of remote offices. And then also, I mean, Amazon's a great example where they allow people to live wherever. And then I know we lost at least one employee because her husband, they said, well, your home office is San Diego, and guess what? You got to move there. And when he was hired on, it was here. It's like, okay, so, you know, so it's just, you know, those kinds of things to be thinking about. Is that important to you? Do you know, and you know, asking the questions from a learning perspective so that, you know that it's something that, you know, fits for you. And I know one of the things we talked about often, so in terms of, okay, so you get an offer and you know a range, and, you know, we showed the little how do you go prepared, you know, in terms of, do you want to negotiate, you know, salary? Kind of understand where you are. If this opportunity is your first opportunity in that field, and part of this is building that base, it's reasonable to say that you're going to be on the lower end of the range. That's generally how we create, you know, salary ranges are to accommodate people who are coming into that role, that are building competency. And then the higher part of the range is for people who have, you know, more skill sets or competencies in that. So that's pretty typical. So you know, if you were just starting out and you end up accepting a job in the lower part of the range, that doesn't mean they're lowballing. You know, that really means that, hey, your skill sets, but in reality, what your employer needs to be thinking about then is as your skills build, your pay better be growing with it. So, you know, it's kind of understanding that compensation cycle is important as you think about what's this right opportunity for me.
Yeah, and I think as we said, you're really fortunate to be in a state where most jobs are going to have the salary or the pay available to you. You're going to know what that range is. But I think it's always a good idea as you learn about the job to step back from that and make your own assessment. And this gets easier as you get more experience, but you think about, what are they asking me to do? How many hours am I working? You know, what is the whole package of benefits? What's the work culture? What are the opportunities for advancement and raises and all of those kinds of things? And based on all of your assessment, think, what do I think I should get paid based on the range? You know, what do I think? What skills do I bring? Where am I strong? If they're going to ask a lot of hours to me, I may want a little bit higher pay, even if my skill set is the same. So I think it's always helpful to go into an interview with some type of idea in your head of, this is what I'm looking for. And I often advise people to say, well, at least know what your walkaway number is, right? If they give you a range of, say, we'll pay 50 to 70, and you look at all the job and you're saying, you know, for all of this requires, I really think I should get at least 54. And they won't budge above 52. If 54 really is your walkaway number, walk away, right? Walk away, because you don't want to go into a job where you're resentful and unhappy. And if you're doing your work, you know, unemployment isn't so low that it's hard to find opportunities. It is really important to find something good that fits. So do your own work in thinking about what is reasonable and what is possible. My daughter is a UWT grad and got hired, and I made her do that before she went to negotiate with her employer. And to her great joy, they came in about $15,000 higher than her walkaway point. She was like, okay, this will work. And there were a lot of other great benefits associated with the position. So she was very, very happy with the outcome. I'm not sure she would have had the courage to turn it down if it had been below her walkway. So I know that's really hard advice, but it at least helps you kind of assess your own value and your own worth by matching things up. So let's get, question,
Actually,
please.
you guys were both hitting the nail on the head.
Oh, okay.
I was gonna ask, how do you even gauge your evaluation of, if you have years of experience in a certain skill level, you've attained education, how do you even evaluate yourself before you go into an interview?
Yeah, and I think some of that has to do with your job search itself, by seeing what opportunities are out there and what the pay ranges are for a variety of opportunities to kind of get the feel for what this looks like. And Glassdoor can be really helpful in giving you general sets of categories. If you have skills and experience and you're able to emphasize that and those things show up in the job description and all of that, then you can use those things as bargaining points, right? So you have this idea in your mind. It may be sort of a range more than an absolute number. I mean, I think an absolute bottom is important to set for yourself. So you're like, yeah, I actually have to be able to afford to work this job. But then beyond that, I think there's a range of what works and is an acceptable thing. But when you get into that nitty-gritty of really negotiating, you can highlight the things that you think are the most important skills and that you are the best at. And that, I think, can help the employer make sense of where should this opening offer be. I know that UW, as a large institution and as part of Washington State, has some really specific things about if you tick this box of X number of years experience, it pushes you up the salary range. And it doesn't actually matter whether you were great in all of those years of experience, right? If you're good, if you persuade me you're good enough to be offered the job and you have that experience, you're getting that bump because that's how it works, right? Great question.
Oftentimes employer asks what your salary requirement is, and that's kind of truthful because employers don't want to waste their time if their salary requirement is above their range, but at the same time, it could also trap you, right? And so how do you respond to something like that?
And I think that's where, if you, the video that we just started, I think was on Indeed.
Sorry, I was outside.
No, which is good. I said, I was gonna say, if you guys wanna watch, there's a lot more to it where she kind of goes through they go through some scenarios, but I think it's one, we're fortunate in the state where most employers, you're gonna have transparency about range. And I think the key is, don't give an absolute number. You may have an idea in your head, but it's acceptable to say, hey, in this field, and I've done some research, and I think that, I'm looking in this range, whether that's $60,000 to $80,000. And that puts you in a position where you haven't locked yourself in a corner. If you've done the research, you kind of know that that's probably, and they may say, oh, well, really, that's really, our range was, something significantly lower in these, but you can have the dialogue. So I think focusing on that range and saying you've done some, doing some research, you have a sense. And then really, I would say it's also a good gauge of an employer how they engage you in this conversation. Because I said, I've got, Jenny Ann here, I know from our own experience, they're very, folks in the HR field they want to help you be successful. So a lot of times you say, well, I really think this is why this is my where I think my range should be or my salary should be if you're countering. And oftentimes they'll say, well, really, we can't do that because, there's an equity issue within our organization, or that puts you too high in the range and it might prevent other opportunities in the future. So that's also how the employer responds in terms of their transparency around their compensation is very insightful about how they treat their employees.
Absolutely. And I would add, if you're going to give a range, make it in the employer's range. Don't, if you're going to say 60 to 80,000 and the job is 50 to 70, but the fact that you have 80 in your head may actually move you down the rankings of people, right? Because if you can't satisfy their salary expectations, they really think they're worth 80, you're not going to get hired. So
This might be the same question. Sometimes when you apply for a job, they have you, list your employer, and then they want your salary in the application for each job and how many years. Is it okay to just leave that blank, or does that work against you?
I've looked at it and I don't know, I've looked at, well, we post our salary information on all of ours. So in ones I've looked at, it's never been a barrier. Now, I will say I've had people that it's like they put something like, that's way out of any reality for us. So sometimes putting a number can work against you. So I would, so.
Sometimes it's one of those fields that they don't let you get past, and I'm like, it's really, I don't wanna tell you what I've made in every job, because again, I don't wanna get locked into something.
I believe that there is a barrier to employers during interviews asking for your salary. Because
it's the applications that are the problem.
yeah, the application,
And,
so if you
yeah,
don't put it on the application, then I think that's.
Yeah, if you're able to not put it on the application,
Yeah.
don't put it on the application, is what I think that's what you were right.
Yeah.
Done, but sometimes you can't get around it, it's
Yeah.
just one of those starred fields, and you're like, ugh, this is gonna again put me in the same old range that I've always been in.
Well, I don't think that's necessarily true, because I think most people are looking at, expecting to progress, and employers know that people are expecting to progress. But realistically, what your most recent or even a while ago income was related to a job has nothing to do with the responsibilities that you would be taking on in this new position. And that's where the focus should be. And so if somebody were to ask you that question, which they shouldn't in an interview, I think your comeback is to say, I don't really see how that, say it nicer than this, but I don't really see how that has anything to do with this job, and kind of help refocus attention. And you can talk about, for this position, my qualifications are this and this.
What do you think about salary NDAs if they start talking to you about signing something that says, don't talk to anyone about compensation?
I have not seen that. I'm not sure that's legal in Washington.
I don't think it's
Sign
legal
an
anymore.
To sign an NDA around a salary.
The state of Washington, so.
Like that.
Outside of the state of Washington?
Yeah, not everybody will get employed here. I mean, there
Yeah.
are places you might want to apply, there elsewhere, and how do you come up against that? How do you approach that?
Generally, NDAs are about confidentiality of critical business information. So I guess you just have to weigh it in the context of why are they asking you to do that? And it may be, let's say, some employers don't like all their business on Glassdoor, and part of Glassdoor is you have to put something in to get something. So I guess it would really be what's the purpose of it? It's like any contractual agreement. It may not be, it may not be that. I think but you have to kind of weigh what is the purpose behind it?
In the application process, if a company or an employer is asking you not to reach out to them further because they have a high influx of applicants, is there a appropriate way to differentiate yourself further beyond just the application?
It is a great question. And I would say respect the request.
Yeah.
Right? And unless you do have an existing personal connection of some type, use the process that they have to try to distinguish yourself, right? So the way you apply and what you say, if you have the opportunity to do a cover letter, to be able to do all of your research and frame the cover letter in a way that matches what they're thinking and how they're looking, because you've done that research, is probably your best bet at that point. I don't think that there are any tips or tricks if they don't want you to do that. And similarly, I've had lots of people actually, after an interview where they were not the top candidate, get in touch and say, tell me what I did wrong, basically. That's just bad. It typically, and my answer typically is another qualified applicant better fit the expectations of the position than you. It's not like you did anything wrong. And if you did do something really embarrassing or inappropriate in an interview, I'm probably not gonna tell you for legal and risk management reasons. So it's never helpful to ask that question.
Yeah, you just read my mind, 'cause my parents always said the squeaky wheel gets the grease. So it's okay to like, cause they always said, did you call? It's okay to do like a, hi, I applied, or does that naggy? Is that what we don't do anymore?
We don't do that anymore in most situations.
So let me tell you a really interesting story, because in most cases, yes. But 14 years ago, when I applied to the Board of Tacoma,
Exactly.
I actually called them and somebody picked up the phone. It was actually your predecessor. And I started talking to him, and it was that phone call that they actually went, oh, wait a minute, she went, because I was 20 plus years a warehouser, like, how would she want to do this? And I'm like, I kind of would like some public service, so it was a really interesting, now today that's much rarer. And I would have said even back then in 2009 at Warehouser, no.
And that's somebody with 20 plus experience,
Yeah.
years of experience
So
as an executive.
sometimes, you never quite know, but I think, I'll try and answer both questions. What can you control? Today, technology controls so much of it. Like I'll read cover letters. I know somebody else who just said the other day, I'm asking not to get cover letters. So, but what you can do is take your resume, take your LinkedIn, especially resume. If you're applying for the job, take the time to read the job requirements and customize your resume to pull out the key attributes. If they want 2 years of this, explain how, hey, I have 2 years of this. Or if they want a specific, skill set, articulate it in a way that makes it easy for them to go, oh, they've got these 5 things that I really need. I think I'll interview them. So, and then make sure you attach the right one. So when I get the ones like, I'd really like to work for the city of Tacoma, I'm like, good luck with that.
I will say
that the employer isn't in the title of your resume, you know how you saved it?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That's a
Blah, blah, blah.
Exactly.
Yeah, that
Mayo Clinic resume.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And I will say this, which also goes against traditional advice. I just went through this a little while ago with a position we were hiring for, and one candidate sent the next day electronic email thank yous to everyone that she had interviewed with. The other candidate sent a handwritten card, arrived a week later, made no impact whatsoever. I was like, email, I feel like I've been getting nothing but email thank yous for the past 10 years. And while it's really nice and I appreciate somebody took the time to do that, in terms of my expectation, actually violated my expectations for how people thank these days. So I think things have changed.
I can't wait to tell my parents.
Am I gonna get an angry call?
Can you talk about what aspects are negotiable and non-negotiable? For example, like some employers might be tied in the salary rate, but then you can really push up the value of the total compensation based on the, other things. And like these days, like remote work, we negotiate on remote work these days too, or like even vacation and like other things.
Yeah, that's a great one. So generally, like I said, things that you can try to negotiate, salary. If it's private sector, it may be, if there's stock options or, restrict, especially smaller upstarts. Some employers, vacation, you can always ask. Some employers that's not in their structure and they'll tell you that. General, time off is a big one, where your work location is.
Flex time, hybrid work from home, all of those things.
But generally, things like medical benefits, pension, those kinds of things are structured plans that you may be able to opt into, or like medical, they may have different, options to choose plans. But you basically, as an employee, would have choices, but you don't really get to negotiate them. So those are really the things where you could focus on
And also like, even though salary might be set based upon certain positions, you can negotiate like sign-on bonuses too, right?
And yes, and then the other thing too, to keep in mind, especially if you're newer in the role and you know that, in 6 months or so during a probationary period, you improve yourself. Some employers will say, okay, maybe my annual, the salary process is annual, but you may be able to negotiate a 3 or a 5 or some sort of evaluation for your 6-month period once you've proved yourself. So that's also another, if you really want a little bit more now, there may be an option to negotiate that depending on the employer.
I know some of you have to go, but if you have time to stick around, feel free to keep asking questions.
I want to know, what is the best time to bring up salary or wages if the interviewer has not brought that up?
Ooh, that's a great question. Typically, I think well, there are certainly some interviews where it's not talked about until you receive the offer. But if you have questions about it, I think it's appropriate. And almost every interview opportunity, you can say, what questions do you have for us? I wouldn't necessarily make money the first question that I asked. I would ask something substantive about the job itself, but it's perfectly appropriate to say, I understand this is the range. Can you tell me a little more about, compensation and how it works here and benefits, and just ask a very general question because they know you're thinking about it and they'll probably reveal what you want to know.
Just make sure you can't find it on your own first.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. There's another question? Do you want to ask, please?
Yeah, it's more position specific. So you kind of mentioned like the bargaining unit and stuff. When there's positions that say, okay, this is the base salary, it's a bargaining unit, but then it also mentions that there's this locality pay. What's that term referencing to, and its effect on the salary?
A locality payment typically references additional compensation for a high cost of living area.
Okay.
That would be my best guess so if you are living in Seattle as opposed to Yelm, you might find that the cost of housing is significantly different and there might be some additional compensation for that.
It's also called the geographic differential, but yes.
Is that different from the cost of living adjustment, COLA?
So typically, a COLA may be, so some employers may have one range that you might get an increase and the COLA is kind of built in. Some employers will split that out and give you like a 3% adjustment each year, and then you might also earn a merit, another increase. That typically is what you get after you're employed. A geographic one may be, hey, we're hiring this position in 5 different locations, but if you're in Seattle, it might cost you, you might get 5% more than if you're living in Houston or something. So, yes,
Right.
yeah.
Well, also Seattle is a city with a higher wage, right? So
It's a higher
Yeah,
cost
so
of living, yeah.
Generally a geographic is for high cost areas. They may, because they know that they can't attract talent if they pay the same amount in Seattle as they do in somewhere in the Midwest, for example.
I've never heard of the locality payment before. I thought he was gonna talk about local dues or something as being part of a bargaining unit.
Well, I thought you were gonna talk about shift differential. So oftentimes, if you're working at night or weekends, then it's your rate plus a differential because, that is an impact, in terms of, that working those off shifts.
And that's how the locality works. You receive that locality bump while you're working in that higher cost locality, but you would lose it perhaps if you moved even within the same company to a different locality that didn't qualify for that. Whereas a COLA, a cost of living adjustment, is typically tied to consumer price increases and it's part of a raise package and it's kind of a permanent part of your salary over time.
It just raises the base.
It just raises everybody up, exactly.
There's another question.
Yeah, we have to get out of the way.
I do have one question for you guys. Typically men make more than women, and also typically men negotiate their salaries with men, women do not. As women, how do we get over that mindset, such that we are on equal
I
par
will
with
tell
men?
you, there is brand new research out that says that gap about women don't ask has closed.
Good.
And that women are just as likely these days to negotiate salaries. we have learned, right? And just as likely to be successful in negotiating salaries.
Thank you so much for coming today.
Thank you guys.
Thank you all.